This presentation is for Chapter 5, Cost Volume Profit Analysis. In Learning Objective 4, we are going to use CVP analysis to perform sensitivity analysis. Managers often want to predict how changes in sales price, cost, or volume affect their profits. Managers can use CVP relationships to conduct sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity analysis is a what-if technique that estimates profit or loss results if sales price, cost, volume, or underlying assumptions change. Sensitivity analysis allows managers to see how various business strategies will affect how much profit the company will make, and thus empowers managers with better information for decision making. If competition for a product is fierce, a company may need to cut the sales price of its product to remain competitive. Assume that the competition in the touchscreen tablet computer business is fierce, and Smart Touch Learning believes it must cut the price to $475 per tablet to maintain market share. The break-even point in units increases from 60 units at a sales price of $500 to 68 units at a sales price of $475. Assume now that one of Smart Touch Learning suppliers raises prices, which increases the variable cost for each tablet to $285 from the original cost of $275. Assuming that the original sales price of $500 is used, the number of units required to break even due to the changes in variable cost increases from 60 units to 63 units rounded. When variable costs change, the contribution margin per unit changes, as does the contribution margin ratio. Now we're going to assume that Smart Touch Learning is considering spending an additional $3,000 on website banner ads. This would increase fixed costs from $13,500 to $16,500. Assuming that the original sales price of $500 per unit and unit variable cost of $275, the new break-even point is 74 units rounded. This slide summarizes how the effect of changes in sales price, variable cost, and fixed cost. So we can see that when sales price per unit increases, contribution margin increases, and the break-even point goes down. But if sales price per unit decreases, contribution margin decreases, and the break-even point would increase. Variable cost per units, when they increase, contribution margin decreases and break-even point increases, and when variable cost per unit decreases, contribution margin goes up and break-even point goes down. When total fixed cost increase, there's no effect on contribution margin per unit, but the break-even point would go up. And when total fixed costs decrease, again, there's no effect on contribution margin per unit, but the break-even point would decrease. In this slide, we are going to look at two different scenarios that Smart Touch Learning's management is considering because they want to do better than just break even. So in scenario 1 and 2, all of the information is the same, except in scenario 1, the contribution margin per unit is $15, and in scenario 2, it's $25. So we notice that the slope of the line, which is the contribution margin per unit for scenario 2, is much steeper, meaning that as sales volume increases, profits increase at a greater rate than they do in scenario 1 with the lower contribution margin per unit. So managers can use contribution margin to predict the change in operating income when volume changes. In the short term, managers may not be able to reduce fixed costs to increase operating income, but they may be able to increase contribution margin. The two components of contribution margin are sales price per unit and variable cost per unit. Therefore, an increase in contribution margin can be created by an increase in sales price, a decrease in variable cost, or a combination of the two. One of the CVP assumptions is that the only factor that affects total cost is a change in volume, which increases or decreases variable and mixed costs. However, costs are often asymmetrical. So costs increase more when sales volume is increasing than costs decrease when sales volume is decreasing, a phenomenon known as cost stickiness. For example, as sales increase, managers hire more workers, which increases the variable cost of labor. However, when sales decrease, managers are reluctant to lay off workers, especially if the sales decline is expected to be temporary, and instead they find alternative activities for the workers. Therefore, the decrease in sales is greater than the proportionate decrease in cost. Managers need to be aware that their decisions, such as not laying off workers, may cause costs to behave differently than expected based on their CVP analysis. This slide illustrates an example of cost stickiness. So we can see in the beginning of the year that the sales were increasing as well as the cost, but they were increasing at about the same rate because total cost as a percent of sales remained steady at 50% until May. However, in May, the sales began to fall off, but the costs did not fall off at the same rate. In fact, by September, the costs were actually more than the sales volume. And that is the conclusion of the demonstration for Learning Objective 4.